Okay, let me just go back. Right, so I'm just going to do it again. So Darwin's observations, he saw on the Galapagos Islands endemic species. So North America, the little cactus was growing, but in the Galapagos Islands, he saw tree cactuses, and they only found there. So they've been separated by water, and they have evolved into a new species, which is very different to the mainland species. And the same with the finches. They were one species, but they've become different species geographically isolated by water on the different islands, and isolated by what they eat, we'll get to that just now, and reproductively isolated because they don't recognize each other. So that's geographical, allopatric, and sympatric isolation. Alright? So sympatric is when these two populations from the same parental species, they inhabit the same area. Okay, hang on, stop. Let me just get my head into this. So that was allopatric speciation. But if we're talking about sympatric, just sympatric, then the common ancestor evolved into different species, but they're still in the same area, like frogs breeding, a certain species breeding in summer, other species breeding in spring. They're still in the same area. They were once one species, but they've become reproductively isolated in terms of breeding time. Okay, so I just had to do it again because that was not working. All right. Sympatric speciation. I didn't know this. So these orcas, but resident and transient, I want to look at why they say transient, but these orcas, killer whales, hey? In the northeast Pacific, they inhabit the same waters, but they avoid each other. They do not interbreed. They even hunt on different prey, smaller fish and other dolphins and things. They've got different diets, vocal behaviors, their calls, and how their social groups are put together. But they are orcas, but they are sympatrically different species of orca in the same area. So they probably evolved from a common ancestor, and for whatever reason, microevolutionary changes led to sympatric reproductively isolated behavior, and even the fact that they feed on different food. Alright? Okay. Modern example, this one, the little maggot flies. Okay. So, 200 years ago, the ancestors of these little apple maggot flies, they live in North America, and naturally, before humans came along and inhabited, they laid their eggs on hawthorns, which is little berries. Alright? Then along came the settlers. Okay? Today these flies lay eggs on hawthorns that are indigenous. So that's the original plant that they laid their eggs on. But now, with people bringing domestic apples into North America, they were introduced into North America by immigrants, all right? And now they also lay their eggs on apple trees. So hawthorn trees, and I think those are, hawthorn little berries and apple trees. Okay. All right, this is long. All right. So, what happens? Females generally choose to lay their eggs on the type of fruit. I've got a little picture. It's just a tree, basically. Okay, so females, what they do is they tend to lay their eggs on the type of tree that they were born on. And the males as well. You'll find the male flies also end up with mating with other hawthorn flies on the same tree that they were born on. So they are, what's the word? Us and them. Okay, so wherever they're born, either on hawthorn trees or the introduced apple trees, the domesticated fruit trees, they tend to live on their own trees and they don't interbreed. So they've been reproductively isolated by what they feed on. So, because they live in the same environment, this is a picture I've got. It's got a little series of pictures. This could be a step towards sympatric speciation, all right? Because they mate on different types of fruit, and they're still one species though. At the moment they just don't like to mate with each other because they're on different fruit trees, but they're still one species, all right? So maybe they've done experiments where they have put them together and they still produce viable offspring. But eventually over time they might become reproductively isolated because of the fruit trees that they feed on. Okay, so that's evolution in action. Hasn't yet happened, all right? They're still one species. Okay, Sympatric speciations, reproductive isolation speciation, can happen by hybridization. Two plant varieties crossbreed. Alright? So, I'm trying to think what's wrong here. Okay, so if we can cross different plants and you get a new breed, and then you can they can breed with each other and you get a new variety basically. Alright, and then that new variety, there's nothing else here. So we can cross, I'm going to make a silly example here. Say peaches and nectarines, and we can actually grow them on the same branch, you know that, on the same tree. Okay, maybe it's not such a good example, but we can produce new varieties, nectarines, from crosses of oranges and naartjies, I think. We produce new varieties, and they become a different species to the original orange and the nectarine. But they've been hybridized. Orange, naartjie, becomes nectarine, but now you can't get orange pollen fertilizing nectar, what did I say? Miniola, did I say miniola? Orange, naartjie becoming miniola. You know miniolas, not nectarines. Miniolas are this easy peeler. Okay, so orange and naartjies are domesticated fruit, but that's what we had when we were growing up. And now you get miniolas. They're darker orange and they're easy peelers. You know, they like oranges but easy to peel. So oranges and naartjies, you get the hybrid, the miniola, but now it's reproductively isolated from the original orange and the naartjie, different species. Okay, because pollen can't fertilize different varieties. Does that make sense? Okay, don't you know what a miniola is? Go to Spar Woolly and you get different types, variations of citrus fruit that we didn't have when we were young. We had oranges and, I didn't like oranges and naartjies. Now you get all these other types. Okay. Alright. Polyploidy. Remember polyploidy? That when there's a non-disjunction of whole sets of chromosomes. So that could lead to a new species. Alright, I'm not sure that I really want to go through all of this, but basically gametes are produced that are diploid, and then diploid gametes fuse and the new individual is tetraploid. And when a newly arisen tetraploid plant tries to breed with its ancestral species, a back cross, then you get triploid. Alright, so when 4N tries to breed with 2N, you now get 3N. Okay? They're not going to ask you detail about this, but these are sterile because 3N, they can't, during meiosis, there's not enough pairing of chromosomes. If they've only got 3 chromosomes, say the one had 2 was the original, then polyploidy occurred and now you get 4N. Then they breed, you get 3N. But when meiosis occurs, there's no pairing of chromosomes. That's why they're sterile. Okay. But polyploidy you could end up with, like wheat is, where does it say? It's something like, how many chromosomes? I can't remember now. So the original, let's just see here, at the bottom there. The original grass from which wheat came from was diploid. Then you got polyploidy, 4N. Then 4N with 4N, you got 8N. So wheat we use now is hexaploid. It can't breed back with the original grass of 2N. It's a new species. It's a polyploid new species produced by us crossing grasses to different grasses to get wheat with bigger kernels. Does that make sense? I always struggle with this section on how to explain polyploidy because it's very abstract, if you know what I mean. Okay, so hexaploid wheat can't breed with its original diploid variety. There's 2 chromosomes, I'm just saying 2, and there's 8. Not going to work. You can't get pairing of chromosomes. Okay, so that's yours. Very long, but yeah. Alright, so polyploid species, they have bigger cells, the plants are larger. That's what, what do you call them, horticulturists? That's what they do. They cross different strawberry plants or different species of fruit plants, and you end up with big watermelons and big marigolds. But it's not a bad thing. They haven't genetically engineered them. Naturally, plants can become polyploid. So they can produce diploid gametes. So now you get tetraploid. Then 4N with 4N gives you octaploid, 8. That can naturally happen. I mean, I didn't know about this when I never heard about it until when I started teaching out in school. It became part of that syllabus. We never did this at school. So they're the original varieties of brassica, and there's the polyploid. And those big strawberries, people think, oh, we're putting in here. No, they're not. They've just got lots and lots of chromosomes. Okay, we're happy with that. So that could result in new species. So this is Brassica napus, and these are the original ones. All right, by hybridization and polyploidy, and remember, we can induce plants to undergo polyploidy by adding that colchicine chemical. Remember that chemical from beetles? You apply it to the cells and then meiosis, it doesn't happen properly and you get non-disjunction and the gametes end up with more than one set of chromosomes. So there we go. Okay, normal fruit, cross, and you end up with polyploid, big fruit. Okay, let's have a look at that. Okay. Right, I'll tell you what, let's look at this summary now. What have we done on here? We are so close now. So, my big sheet, this side. Right? If you look there, on the left-hand side is geographic or allopatric speciation, lake dries, etc. Just trying to scan you quickly. So there's a geographical barrier, river, whatever, Galapagos finches, and then even it could be different food sources, like those little beetles, or the finches feeding on different foods available on the different islands. Okay, so that is geographical isolation. All right, then on the right-hand side, sympatric. All right, so that's reproductive barriers. So they still live, they've got a little picture that looks like this. So the original ancestral species gave rise to two, but that one still lives in the same area. Okay, they still live with each other, but they don't recognize each other reproductively. So polyploids could be reproductively isolated. Big strawberry plants, polyploid plants, could be growing in the same patch as normal strawberry plants, but because of the non-matching chromosome number, they are reproductively isolated, but still in the same environment. Okay. All right. Behavioral, I like this at the bottom. Behavioral isolation. So they talk about peahens and courtship displays and little fireflies. You know those little fireflies that flash that light at night? And if that pattern is different, it's like, I don't like your WhatsApp. I'm not going to breed with you. I mean, that's what it is, eh? And then ecological isolation. So different habitats, the marbled cat and the Asiatic cat, they're in the same forest, but the former is almost completely arboreal. Do you know what that means? Lives in the trees, while the latter hunts deer and rodents on the forest floor. In fact, there is a group of warbler birds, little warblers, that over time they have become reproductively isolated in the same tree. There's a study on this, and these little warblers, they were once one species, but now they are different species that live in different heights in the tree, and they feed on different things. So maybe insects or whatever the tree makes, maybe the leaves or other insects or whatever. They become isolated from each other reproductively. They don't recognize each other. They have different bird song, and they even eat different foods on different levels of the tree. So that's just a little, if you go and look at my PowerPoint, I think it's there, okay, about the warblers. All right, being reproductively isolated on the same species of tree. Okay, then at the bottom, all right, this is a nice summary. At the bottom, mechanical isolation. You know, at the moment, dogs are still one species, but can a Great Dane male reproduce with a little Chihuahua female? No. So there is some reproductive isolation already, but you can still get other similar sized breeds of dogs reproducing and getting new varieties. So they're still fertile, so it's still one species. Do you see that? But over time, imagine if Great Danes were separated from Chihuahuas on islands or wherever, different parts of the world, and they only breed with each other. No, that's a wrong example. Medium-sized dogs, Labradors and, what's the other one? Golden retrievers. At the moment, they can still breed, and you can get crosses, and you get labradoodles, and all these funny things. So at the moment, they can still breed, and you get hybrids, but imagine if they were separated over a lot of time. You know, dogs are still one species, but in thousands of years, maybe they diverge enough, adaptive radiation, different habitats, whatever, they could become different species. But at the moment, they're not. They're still one species. The chromosomes can still pair. They've still got 78 chromosomes, all of them. There's just so much variation. Big, small, fluffy, you know, whatever. Do you understand that? Okay. And then temporal isolation. There's the frog example. There's a little graph there at the bottom. I don't know who's online there. It looks like it's me. That's it. So there's a little graph there with the wood frog and the tree frog and the bullfrog. And the one breeds in April and the other one in June and the one in July. Different time species. So they were one species. So then maybe they give a graph to you like that. And then you've got to think, oh yes, it's sympatric speciation. All right. So now we get to patterns of macroevolution. That is on the other side. Okay? It's where there's this graph. It says patterns of macroevolution. It's basically how quick and who evolves into who. That's what it's about. All right? So there's two patterns of evolution, okay? And who evolves into who is A. So patterns of macroevolution there. And then how quick, rate of evolutionary change, gradual, or I'll show you now. It's called punctuated equilibrium. All right, so the patterns of macroevolution. Remember, macroevolution is producing new species. I haven't seen these words pop up in papers. Okay, but it's that idea of what's happening here. So you get anagenesis and cladogenesis. Ana, the way I remember it, ana, one line. Clado, remember cladogram? Branching. One line, branching. Okay, let me show you what it means. Alright, so macroevolution has been clearly shown in fossils. So the fossil record has shown that there are two patterns of evolution. That A became B, became C, became D. Only D is now present, but these are extinct and fossils were found. But they could see the gradual progression of changes leading from A to B to C, and now D, which is more advanced and still around. It's extant. So that's called anagenesis. One, an. I don't know. That's how I remember it. Okay? Cladogenesis is what I've been drawing on the board. It's when there's branching or splitting, leading to more lineages, evolutionary lines. So with anagenesis, you end up with anagenesis. Can you see that the number of species stays the same? These have died out. The number of species has stayed the same. But with cladogenesis, like the finches, there was one ancestral finch from the mainland, and now we end up with 14 clades, branches. There are 14 species of finch on the Galapagos Island. So now you've increased species diversity, not you, but okay, does that make sense? Whereas here, species diversity didn't increase. So this is just what they've seen when they look at fossils and try and figure out what has happened. They can see progression, or they can see that ancestral species are similar to many now, like the finches. Okay? All right. Next one. Right, anagenesis, non-branching, slurring, where do we call that? And branching, cladogenesis. Anagenesis, so the species changes into another over time. There wasn't branching, for whatever reason, it just depends on the mutations. So butterfly A became B, became C. Cladogenesis, yeah, so this is more common, and I think, so it says here that paleontologists, people who study fossils and try and figure out who's related to who and to modern organisms as well, they think that this is more important than anagenesis. Probably because they've seen more evidence for evolution, forming new species, adaptive radiation, like the finches. Okay, we know branching evolution. Alright, so there's cladogenesis. And then, you can't really find fossils of butterflies. But imagine if these were reptiles, different reptiles leading to reptiles we have today. you've got to try and figure out, so where does this one fit? You know, who's related to who by looking at their features, and which one's older, dating of the fossils. Try and see, you know, what fits with it. Okay, look at the bottom there, change in form and time. Okay, comparatively, so, hello, this is anagenesis, but when you get a split, cladogenesis. There's been different lineages. Maybe that group was separated from that group by a river. Maybe these two groups are sympatrically isolated from each other reproductively. You can make up stories. Okay, use the information that they give you and you know what's happening here. Should we do this now? That's so close. So how quick does evolutionary change happen? All right, does it occur gradually? So man, dancing. Okay, do species gradually change into others? I'm tired, I'm cold. Okay, do species gradually over time change into others? Or is there speciation and hardly anything? And then more species, then hardly any change. And then more species, do you see what I'm getting at? Okay, I've never done that before. Must be because you're down here. Okay. Alright, so we get what we call gradualism and punctuated equilibrium. How quick does evolution take place? And, I'm getting excited now, I'm getting there. On this side, the picture of the butterflies, rate of evolutionary change. Is it gradually over time that you get new species, or in spurts, basically in spurts? Okay. Alright, so what do we see here? So with gradualism, when evolution occurs at a fairly constant rate, so A becoming B, C, D, E, F, whatever, G, whatever, and then you end up, these are the ones that are alive today, but all the others, wherever, all right, or even along here, have died out. Gradually they change into other species. Punctuated equilibrium, there was an ancestor, hardly any change, no change. New ancestor, no change. Okay. There was times when there was hardly any change. All right. So gradualism occurs at a steady state, gradual change. As the environment changes, those better suited to the changes pass their genes on to the next generation. Natural selection by survival of the fittest. Okay? Changes accumulate until reproduction with the original species is no longer possible. Then you've got a new species. Alright? So they're becoming different, and eventually these can't reproduce anymore. If they can't reproduce with the ancestral, well, maybe the ancestral's not around, but yeah. Okay, no longer able to reproduce. There we go. Becoming different. Eventually, they can't reproduce with the original one. So then you end up with, now hang on, ancestor, okay, I'm going to alright. Punctuated equilibrium shows evolution changing sudden bursts with long periods of time with hardly any change in between. Rare and rapid events of branching. Maybe because there is lots of oxygen. Do you remember that oxygen graph? And you get giant dragonflies and big trees and whatever. And then there was something else, and then the world was kind of settled down. And then maybe there was a meteor. Now the environment changed drastically again. There was more species, maybe not lots of speciation when there was a meteor. But maybe the temperatures increased to a nice, moderate 25. Lots of organisms involved. I can make up stories. It's like that. Okay, so same, then change. Same, then change. Okay, hardly, not much change in between speciation events. And a classic example, which I have mentioned, but now you can see it. The peppered moth. So originally, you only got, or you mainly got, the peppered one, the light-colored moth, which blended in with lichen on trees. And they weren't preyed on as much. But you also get the dark or the melanic form. Melanin, remember melanin is the pigment? So So melanic means the dark form. Alright. Okay, so I didn't do this in grade 9. No. Okay, so can you see the two? Alright, so there's the dark one, there's the light one, and there's the dark one. So which ones are going to be more protected on the camouflage on the left side? Well, you can't even see it. The dark melanic one is going to be preyed on. So there's this whole story about, the story's here. I mean, it's a lovely little story. I always tell it. So let's rather, okay. So normally they are grey white. Normally they are speckled. That's why they call this the peppered moth. And they well camouflage against lichen on trees during the day. But there's a genetic mutation, just like blue eyes, that causes some of them to be black. They're called melanic, and they're not as well camouflaged on lichen, and they're more likely to be eaten by birds and other predators. So it means that fewer dark ones survive and breed, so they are less common. All right? And that's the normal situation in the countryside of Britain. But then you've got the industrial evolution and lots of pollution. So in the 19th century, in the towns and cities, it was seen that the black form of the moth was more common. Because now there weren't trees with lots of lichens. The trees were covered with the sooty air. The pollution covered the trees. The trees became darker. So now the pale moth was the one that was preyed on more, and the darker one is the one that survived more generations. Moths are short-lived. They don't live for what? 2 weeks? So this happens in a very short time that you get either lots of, in the countryside, lots of pale ones and lots of dark ones in more polluted areas. So it happens quite quickly. So only about, 40 years? From 1848 to 1895, 98% of them had become black. And normally evolution takes, hundreds of thousands of years. But that was very quick because of their very quick lifespan. They breed quickly. Isn't that interesting? And there's still gene flow between them. They can still breed with each other, but there's genetic drift. So if there's lots of lichen-covered trees, then they're more pale. If there's lots of sooty-covered trees, then they're darker. Genetic drift, which one's more common at the time, depending on the conditions. But there can still be gene flow between them because they're still one species. For some reason, they still recognize each other. They don't see them as different dark and light colors as different species. Industrialization. Okay, I think we're done. Hey, we're going to read that? I read that one. Oh, I think it is the whole thing. Okay, I don't do my PowerPoint when it comes out like that. I actually don't know how to do that. All right, then there's lovely little videos and things that you can go watch. Okay, are we done for today? Let's see what's over here. I want to see how long we've still got. So we're on 74. And it's not a lot. It just looks a lot because man puts each slide, it pops up again. So yes, we are sitting on, I know it's long, it's 162 slides, but in actual fact, bits pop up on the same slide every time. Okay, so I'm going to switch off the video for now and we'll decide if we're going to make another one today. The next bit is artificial selection.